Thank you. The final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 19246 in the name of Elaine Smith on the positive contribution of Catholic schools. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Can I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now? And I call on Elaine Smith to open the debate. Ms Smith, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and can I thank the many members who supported my motion and those who will be contributing this evening. I should declare an interest at the outset. Since I attended St Patrick's Catholic Primary and Secondary in Coatbridge, my son Van was also a pupil at St Patrick's Primary and St Ambrose High, and I'm a trained Catholic secondary school teacher. This debate is taking place during Catholic Education Week 2019, the theme of which is promoting gospel values. And 4 values that should play a part in the life of every Catholic school are truth, love, justice and freedom. Also, as Archbishop Tartaglia said in the Scottish Catholic Observer, this theme reflects the vision and aim of Catholic education that Catholic schools centred on the person of Jesus Christ form young people to discover and follow the Christian vocation to live responsibly with and for others in accordance with the message of Christ, and so build up and transform society for the better. Some of the things that make Catholic schools distinctive are learning is shaped using gospel values, prayer, worship and religious celebrations are integral to the life of the school, and Catholic schools promote social justice and serve their communities. Their vision, aims and values to educate the whole person, body, mind and soul are developed in partnership with parents and parishes. Some of the questions Catholic schools ask their pupils include: are we challenged to use our talents for the service of others? Do we put into practice the things we learn about the love of Jesus through our own acts of witness and our contributions to charities? And do we show love and concern for others in our school? Presiding Officer, state-run Catholic schools have been an integral part of our communities for more than a century. They give children not only a foundation of their faith, but also an understanding of the world around them. The historic concordat between the Catholic community and the state over 100 years ago saw 224 Catholic schools transfer into the public sector, and in return they received a guarantee of state funding, agreement to teachers requiring church approval with regard to religious belief, and a statutory right to a distinctive Catholic ethos and identity. It was the Catholic community that paid for the land and building of over 60% of the Catholic schools we have today. Despite being in existence since 1918, sadly faith schools have again come under attack under the guise of ending sectarianism in Scotland. However, the issue in Scotland which needs urgently addressed is anti-Catholicism. Roman Catholics are subject to more attacks than all other religious groups combined. Indeed, half of all reported religiously aggravated hate crimes are against Roman Catholics. The recent comments by a former senior police officer claiming that Catholic schools should be abolished in a bid to end sectarianism is unacceptable. It attempts to blame victims for crimes, but it also flies in the face of reality. If sectarianism could simply be resolved by the removal of Catholic schools, then how do we explain and resolve other forms of prejudice and religious discrimination? There are 2,000 Catholic schools in England and Wales, so if Catholic schools cause sectarianism, then why is it not an issue there? It's perfectly obvious that abolishing Catholic schools will not end the attacks on Catholics in Scotland. Presiding Officer, as I mentioned earlier, I was fortunate to have enjoyed a Catholic education and also have taught in Catholic schools. The ethos of Catholic schools is one of inclusivity and non-discrimination, and parents of other faiths than none also choose Catholic schools for their children, showing that the appeal goes beyond the Catholic community. Whilst teaching, I was aware of the exceptional academic encouragement and of pupils being inspired to lead good lives built on Christian values, personal integrity and moral courage. That is the very opposite of the hate-filled sectarian bigotry that exists in Scotland, the same bigotry which Catholics are more likely than anyone else to be a victim of. We do indeed need to end sectarianism in Scotland, but it will not be done by unwarranted attacks on the religious group most likely to be victims of it. I certainly hope that all parliamentarians believe that anti-Catholicism has no place in Scotland and agree that it must be challenged in all its forms, and that includes standing up for the right of Catholic schools to exist. Beyond that, there are other reasons to support and celebrate our Catholic schools. For example, the good work being done in central Scotland by St Margaret's in Airdrie, engaging with pupils in Malawi. And as patron of Missio Scotland, I would also like to commend pupils from St John Ogilvie and Holy Cross High Schools in Hamilton for their recent work in Uganda. And I'm sure colleagues will want to welcome the 30-odd pupils and their teachers who are in the gallery with us this evening. And I was also delighted to learn that Archbishop Cushley was going to take time to be with us this evening, but the time change has meant that he may not manage. I'm hopeful that he may yet be able to join us. I hope we will hear other positive examples from colleagues, and please do join us for a cup of tea in the Chamber Conference Room after the debate. Scotland's Catholic schools not only produce fantastic young active citizens, they produce academic excellence. Year after year, Catholic schools secure outstanding academic results in some of the most deprived areas of our country, helping to close the attainment gap. And this month we saw Catholic school pupil Declan Shafi awarded Candidate of the Year by the SQA. And I think it's also worth noting that all three of the candidates nominated for that prestigious national award were taught in Catholic schools, including St Ambrose and Coatbridge. Instead of closing our high-performing schools down, we should be focused on repeating their best practice across all of our state schools. Catholic schools are a sign of an inclusive society that embraces diversity and a country where freedom of choice and speech are a part of the culture. It's time that those with power and privilege in our society stopped attacking faith schools and started questioning why Catholics are the subject of such a volley of hatred as the country's statistics seem to show. I care passionately about Catholic schools. I want them to be able not only to exist but to flourish in the future, and I'm pleased that a number of MSP colleagues also support that and believe that Catholic schools are good for Scotland. If I might, Presiding Officer, just close with the words of Archbishop Tartaglia, and I quote, "In Catholic schools, our children and young people absorb the message that God is present and active in their lives, especially in challenging or difficult times. They learn to recognise the signs of God's love around them and realise they are called to be instruments of God's grace in their families, among their friends and in the world." Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can I just say to the gallery, public in the gallery, that we don't permit applause. I understand why, but it's not permitted in the chamber. Members alone may applaud. I have 9 members down to speak, so I'd ask you to keep your allocated time, please. I call Richard Lyle to be followed by Liz Smith.
Presiding Officer, as an SNP politician of some 43 years, it is a pleasure to speak this debate today. I'd like to thank Elaine Smith for bringing the debate to the Chamber today. Last year, Catholic schools celebrated the 100-year anniversary. In 1918, the Education Scotland Act brought, rightly, Roman Catholic schools into the state system, while allowing Roman Catholic schools to retain their religious character, access to school by priests, and the requirement that school staff be acceptable to the Church. I support the retention of the 1918 Scotland Act, and I always have. I support the Catholic schools, and I support the right of Catholics to be educated at a Catholic school. The Education Scotland Act of 1918 was the most influential piece of legislation governing Scottish education in the 20th century. It's a system which established and is still essentially in place today. Yet it is remembered now, mostly because of one of its provisions, setting up a mechanism of which Catholic schools could transfer from the ownership of the Church to that of the locally elected education authorities. Significant through that arrangement is the importance lies within the instance of the Act's wider framework of promoting the liberal universalism of becoming Scotland's guiding social principle in the ensuing century. Standing back and taking a wider view, what the 1918 Act introduced was an unprecedented concordat between the Church and State in the provision of education. I'm not sure it's been paralleled elsewhere, although I would venture to hope that its longevity and the way it has so well served the interests of all the parties augurs well for more recent concordat. The more recent concordat, one of which was the Scottish Concordat, which was guided through by John Swinney, MSP, reached with COSLA and today's local authorities. I remember it well because I was the one who promoted it through COSLA when I was SNP leader during that time. The tradition of the Church working together with state, both local and national government, has been well sustained over the last 10 decades since that 1918 Act. Legislation may have changed its form, and so have the administrative bodies and the education structures, but the strength of the relationship is undiminished. It shines through the distinctive contribution which Catholic schools now make to Scottish society and education as a whole. Today, there are 336 thriving Catholic schools in Scotland. We celebrate that Catholic schools are an integral and highly successful part of public education in Scotland. For the 1918 Scotland Act, Catholic school teachers were not paid the same as their counterparts in state schools. Additionally, Catholic schools were not keeping up with the developments. Now Catholic schools benefit from equal state funds, thus keeping them at the same level as other schools in Scotland. From a story on Google, a young boy attending a Catholic voluntary school in Edinburgh in 1918 described, I sound like Stuart Stevenson, described the aftermath of the Education Act. He said it was just like Christmas. Catholic schools were now part of the national system. At the end of the day, we need to think about what is really important, that all the children in Scotland, regardless of religion, have access to education schools. They need to be successful and to be good citizens. During my time as a councillor for Orbison, Motherwell District and the SNP group leader in North Lanarkshire, I built up many relationships with all my constituents, both priests and ministers. Sadly, yes, religious divide is prevalent, but we're all working towards to end that. I abhor any attack on Catholic schools. People should know better. Catholic schools are an integral and highly successful part of public education in Scotland, and I wish them well. I support the retention of the 1918 Scotland Act and the retention of Catholic schools, and I thank Elaine Smith for this important debate tonight.
Thank you very much. I call Liz Smith to be followed by Ian Gray. Ms Smith, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and thank you to Elaine Smith for bringing this motion to Parliament. It will not have escaped members' notice at the weekend on the back of the Sunday Times publication of Scottish Schools' comparative results that there was much discussion about what makes a good school. Yet again, Scotland's Catholic schools showed very strong performance, just as they always do, and so it's perhaps important to reflect on what characteristics make this happen, something that I'll return to in just a minute. Scotland in the 21st century is an increasingly multicultural country, with the majority of religious schools being Catholic, but a growing number of smaller numbers serving other denominations. The Catholic Church, obviously, has more than a millennia of experience in education and of the holistic development of young people, as Elaine Smith described, whether that's educational, cultural, social and spiritual. And it's always been central to the Catholic structure of schooling, not just in Scotland, but worldwide. So it's therefore right and proper that we acknowledge the success of Catholic education over a very long period of time in terms of creating well-balanced and well-educated young people. Diversity in education and the parental choice that comes with that are inherently good things and should be seen as such. Catholic schools and their availability are part of that mix, not least because it gives our young people a wider spectrum of open and accessible schooling, and therein lies the parallel to the fact that many of those Catholic schools consistently achieve well, including within some of the more deprived areas of Scotland. A recent study of Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Education gives very good reading for the Catholic schools, and particularly, as I say, when it comes to their progress within some of the more difficult, more deprived areas of Scotland. And I think we have to ask ourselves as to why that is. I think it's a very important tradition, and like other members in this chamber, I am fully supportive of the work that they do. Children and young people obviously come from very dissimilar backgrounds, faiths, cultures, communities, and they're often at different places in the range of religious conviction. While most young people will be of the Catholic tradition in Catholic schools, some will be of other denominations and religious traditions, or have views that may be independent of any specific religious conviction. They come to Catholic schools because of what they represent, priding themselves not just on the ethos and vision and values, but on good quality education. Catholic schools have long met academic and emotional requirements for their students, and the success of that approach should be seen in exam results, but also, more importantly, in the positive destinations of the young people as they leave school and take their place in Scottish society. For those who are arguing that separating and encouraging fundamental lines of difference in schooling is contentious and leads to religious, ethnic and socio-economic division, my response to that is that such an education may actually help young people in recognition and appreciation for what lies around them. Other international religions, whether that's Judaism, Islam, and many others, are generally taught in Catholic schools from primary 3 and further pursued in S1 and S2, building on the informal experiences that these young people are likely to get before and after that time. I think we have a lot to learn from the Catholic form of education in terms of the tolerance that is imbued within their young people, and that understanding and appreciation of others' cultural histories and cultural divides. That being said, I wholly agree that we should do more to encourage close partnerships between dominated base schools, and indeed the divisions within particular traditions, and sometimes those which affect the criticism that we hear, we need to attend to that both in our own cultural output. Deputy Presiding Officer, can I finish on paying great tribute to the Catholic schools in Scotland? They have a remarkable tradition. We should celebrate that, and we are very pleased to welcome them to the Chamber today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Ian Gray to be followed by Joan McAlpine. Mr Gray, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Let me begin by congratulating Elaine Smith on obtaining this debate to mark Catholic Education Week and to acknowledge the positive contribution of Catholic schools in Scotland. As the motion notes, and Elaine herself said, these schools have been an integral part of our state education system in Scotland for 101 years now. Their place enshrined in the 1918 Education Scotland Act and protected ever since. It's right, I think, to recall just how important that legislation and the historic concordat it marked between the state and the Catholic community was. At the time, we've often debated sectarianism here and acknowledged its continuing blighting of our country. But it's sometimes referred to as Scotland's secret shame. Well, 100 years ago, there was nothing secret about the prejudice and bigotry aimed at the Catholic, largely Irish community in Scotland. It was open and blatant, with my own church, the Church of Scotland, to its shame, more than complicit. It was not limited to the west of Scotland either. Indeed, my own late father used to talk to me about growing up in Leith in the 30s. And at that time, John Cormack and Protestant Action were a very significant political force there and in Edinburgh's council. So Catholic schools were and are an important reflection of our desire for a tolerant, diverse and inclusive state education system. They are a bulwark against sectarianism, and they are an important indication to the Catholic community that Scotland will not tolerate bigotry. A guarantee that, as Elaine Smith pointed out, is sadly still needed today. There are also, as speakers have said, very successful schools, providing high-quality education for 20% of our children of all faiths and none. In many instances, serving communities where children face particular barriers to education and delivering excellent results, academic and otherwise, even in those circumstances. And given their ethos and values, there should be no surprise either that Catholic schools are outward-looking and actively engaged in charitable work in their communities too. Indeed, a few days ago, I was fortunate enough to be a guest at a mass given by Archbishop Cushley, who I think has joined us now in the public gallery, in St Martin's in Trinent, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of that church. And we heard there about the work being done in the diocese to support refugees and asylum seekers, encouraging pupils in local Catholic schools to understand the similarities to the challenges their own families faced a few generations ago and to support those facing those challenges now. That's a good example, I think, of exactly how our Catholic schools are contributing to ensuring the tolerant and welcoming future we want for our country and all its diverse communities of whatever faith or indeed none.
Thank you very much. I call Joan McAlpine to be followed by Annabel Ewing. Ms McAlpine.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'd like to also congratulate Elaine Smith on securing the debate today, and I was delighted to sign her motion. And I'd like to welcome Archbishop Cushley and the pupils to the gallery today. I spoke out on this issue a couple of months ago, actually in response to a social media comment from Mark Miller, who's a very famous and successful filmmaker from Coatbridge, the hometown of Elaine Smith, who put up a post saying that he had heard a number of politicians saying that Catholic schools had to go, saying this privately. Well, I don't know who they were because I've never heard any of them saying it privately, but I think the turnout today amongst politicians from across this Parliament for this debate shows that this Parliament is fully in support of Catholic schools, and we want to send a really strong message that by supporting Catholic schools, we're supporting a truly equal society that accepts difference and diversity. I totally agree with Elaine C. Smith's comments that suggesting that Catholic schools are in any way contributing to sectarianism is basically tantamount to victim blaming, because Catholics even today are still subject to far more sectarian attacks and discrimination than the other parts of the population. I'd also like to back what others have said about the 1918 Education Act. I think some of the people who have attacked Catholic schools really are doing so out of a position of complete ignorance, and they really should read their history, because the 1918 Education Act put Catholic schools on the same footing as non-Catholic schools at a time when discrimination was absolutely appalling amongst the Catholic Irish population in Scotland, including my own grandparents and great-grandparents who came over from Ireland. Thank you.
Elaine Smith.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I thank the member for taking an intervention. It just reminded me that I should have said in my own speech that a year ago there was the Scottish Catholic Education Service had a stall in Parliament to basically celebrate the 100 years of Catholic education, but also I should have welcomed Barbara Cooper, Director of SCES, to the gallery as well tonight. So I wonder if you'd join me in doing that.
Joan McAlpine.
Yes, I'd be absolutely delighted to join you in doing that. Yeah, the 1918 Act, I think what's important to remember is that obviously Scotland has a proud tradition of education that's actually rooted in the Church of Scotland, going back many hundreds of years. And the schools that grew up in Scotland were parochial schools and very, very, very close to the Kirk. And that's absolutely something to be celebrated for the Church of Scotland. But it did mean, with the large influx of Roman Catholics from Ireland, that they didn't feel that the schools that were provided through the parochial boards and then through the local education boards were really going to give their children the religious education that they needed, and they were absolutely right. And that's why it was such an advance in 1918 to bring Catholic schools into the state system, because before that Catholic schools had been very much underfunded compared to the so-called non-denominational schools. I want to say something about the term non-denominational schools. I went to Catholic schools, went to St Ninian's in Gourock and St Clumba's in Greenock, and I really benefited from that education. However, my own children I chose, for other reasons, not to send them to a Catholic school, but to send them to a non-denominational school. Non-denominational schools do have close links to the Church of Scotland. I was surprised, actually, that although they do teach about other religions, of course, but there are links to the local Church of Scotland. So it's absolutely not true to say that we have Catholic schools and non-denominational schools. That's absolutely not true at all. So I realise I'm up to my 4 minutes, but I just wanted to reiterate that the First Minister's comments last year when she spoke on the centenary of the 1918 Education Act, where she said that the Act had shaped modern Scotland for the better and were a national success story and a far-sighted compromise between church and state. Catholic schools benefit everyone in our society, and long may that continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I call Annabel Ewing to be followed by Jackie Bailey. Ms Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I am also pleased to have been called to speak in this important members' debate tonight, and I congratulate Elaine Smith on securing the debate. And I too would wish to welcome Archbishop Cushley to the gallery, and indeed to all our other distinguished guests tonight. And I would wish at the outset to put on record my unswerving support for faith-based education in Scotland, and hence also for Catholic schools. Catholic schools have made a positive contribution to Scotland's education system and indeed to our wider society. And I would argue that they are indeed a national success story. The background to Catholic schools becoming part of the state education system in Scotland is indeed the 1918 Education Scotland Act, already referred to. And it's important to note that this legislation provided, in fact, for a number of groundbreaking reforms, including the raising of the school leaving age. And of course, it also provided for this amazing partnership as between the Catholic Church and the state, by way of, in fact, what indeed, as Joan McAlpine said, was a very foresighted development And in terms of this historic concordate Catholic schools, which were at that time set up on a voluntary basis and largely were underfunded, were brought within the state education system, and therefore access to state funding was available. But nonetheless, they retained the right to maintain their Catholic ethos. And this, I believe, was indeed a game changer for young Catholics in Scotland, as they saw, first of all, facilities in their schools improve significantly, and with that, indeed, importantly, their prospects. And also it served to signify a different relationship on the part of the Catholic community with the state. And as Professor Sir Tom Devine has commented when giving the 2017 Cardinal-winning lecture on the 1918 Act, he stated, and I quote, that it enabled the growth of a large Catholic professional class, fully integrated into the mainstream of Scottish society. So the 1918 Act reflected a new level of trust in Scotland, where Catholic schools felt that they could play a full role in the development and wealth of the nation. And over the years, we have seen the distinctive contribution that Catholic schools have made, with a high level of achievement and attainment. And this reflects the truism that diversity is a source of strength, which should be celebrated as it enriches and shapes our society for the better. Indeed, we have seen children come through Scotland's Catholic schools with a strong moral foundation, a sense of personal responsibility, an understanding of the common good, and a strong commitment, as has been noted, to charitable causes at home and abroad. And that must be all to the good and fits in very well indeed with the importance that we in Scotland place on free education for all. It being recalled that universal school education was introduced in Scotland in 1696, where we saw a school and a schoolmaster for every parish in the country. Presiding Officer, I am proud as the MSP for Cowdenbeath constituency to say that there are many excellent Catholic primary schools in my constituency, and they are St Bride's in Cowdenbeath, St John's in Rosyth, St Joseph's in Kelty, St Kenneth's in Ballingry, St Ninian's in Cardenden and St Pat's in Lochelie. The teachers and staff in all of these schools are to be congratulated for all the work they do in helping young people to be the best that they can be. And of course, I would wish also to take this opportunity to commend teachers and staff in all schools in my constituency who do so much to improve the life chances of young people in Fife. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I would wish to close by quoting the First Minister, who, when giving the Cardinal-winning lecture last year, said, and I quote, "The Scottish Government is an unequivocal supporter of Catholic schools. We value the contribution that Catholic schools make to modern Scotland. We want that contribution to continue in the years ahead. I am proud to endorse those sentiments and to pledge to my constituents that I will always support the role of Catholic schools in our country." Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I call Jackie Bailey to be followed by Fulton McGregor. Miss Bailey, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and let me join with others in offering my congratulations to Elaine Smith for securing this debate and for the content of her speech, and also welcome all of the visitors to the public gallery this evening. It is important that we have an opportunity in this Parliament to debate the value of Catholic education from an informed viewpoint. As others have noted, it was the Education Scotland Act of 1918 that enshrined Catholic schools in the public sector, guaranteeing them funding from the state whilst retaining their distinct ethos, identity and culture. They, of course, have grown in number from 224 at the commencement of the Act to some 366 schools today. Let me take a leaf from Annabel Ewing's book and mention the schools in my area. I have one Catholic secondary in my constituency, Our Lady in St Patrick's High School, with feeder primaries of St Joseph's in Helensburgh, St Martin's in Renton, St Mary's in Alexandria, St Keswick's in Balloch, St Michael's and St Patrick's primaries in Dumbarton, and St Peter's in Bellsmire. All of them excellent schools with excellent hard-working staff that work closely with their non-denominational counterparts in the area. And my experience is that when visiting these schools are attended by Catholics and non-Catholics alike. There are children there from Muslim backgrounds, from Chinese backgrounds, and from families that are not religious at all. And that's because they believe in and value the ethos of the school. If I consider Our Lady in St Patrick's as an example, the extent of the volunteering, charitable work and service in the community is a substantial and significant part of school life. The ethos and culture of caring for others is embedded in much of what they do and helps to shape their young people's sense of civic duty. And this, of course, goes hand in hand with excellence in academic attainment. Despite drawing from a significantly deprived catchment area, the school outperforms every other school in my constituency, which is quite an achievement. But nothing, of course, ever stands still, and Catholic education has evolved. Now, almost half of the local Catholic primary schools in my area are now in shared campuses with non-denominational primary schools. But there is a lot of joint activity which works well, whilst the schools retain their distinct identity. So the Catholic education I have witnessed is very good. It's all about inclusion, tolerance and cooperation. It's not about segregation or separation. For those who think or infer that Catholic schools contribute to sectarianism, I would say that that is extremely lazy thinking and runs contrary to the evidence we can see in our own local communities. Elaine Smith was right when she said that Catholic schools in England don't seem to be such a problem. Nor do I think that being a fan of one or other of the major football teams makes you sectarian. In my local area, there is a passionate Celtic-supporting minister of the Kirk. Of course, he has good taste. There are tribal loyalties, there's keen rivalry, but the majority of people are there for the football and nothing else. So sectarianism existed long before the Education Scotland Act of 1918. Its roots are deep-seated and will only be addressed by education. Education to change society's attitudes. And we should be encouraged by a TNS survey done a few years ago that more than 90% of Scots recognise the negative impacts of sectarianism and wanted to see action to address it. That's important, so that work from groups like Nil by Mouth and Sense Over Sectarianism, which are essential to break the cycle of bigotry that remains, will land on people that want change. And we need sustained long-term support for this activity directly from government. So, Presiding Officer, in Catholic Education Week, let's celebrate the contribution made to our local communities by Catholic schools and to civic society across Scotland, and let's ensure their continuation for decades to come.
Thank you. And before I call Fulton McGregor, I say due to the number of members still wishing to speak in the debate, I am minded to accept a motion under Rule 8.14.3 that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes and invite Elaine Smith to move the motion.
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. The question is that under Rule 8.14.3 the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Are we agreed? Yes. We are. Thank you. I now call Fulton McGregor to be followed by John Mason. Mr McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I put on record my thanks to Elaine Smith, and I know that this is an issue that she has taken forward passionately over the years. And I, like everybody else, I agree entirely with this motion. Catholic schools do make a positive contribution to Scotland and indeed are an integral part of the fabric of our constituencies and nation. I myself attended Coatbridge High, a non-denominational school, but as is normal in central Scotland, had many friends and family who attended Catholic schools. Our friendships were based in geography and shared interests, not whether you went to Coatbridge High or St Pat's, the two main schools that served the area I lived in. And many people I know now send their children to Catholic schools, and I think, as other speakers have said, some who went to non-denominational schools themselves, and the reverse of that, as Joan McAlpine demonstrated. The education provided has always been considered positive and inclusive, and in no way disadvantages pupils moving forward. And as MSP, I'm lucky enough to go around all the schools in my constituency and would pay tribute to the teaching staff and the pupils at each and every one of them. And I witness firsthand the work that they do. And there's too many to mention, Presiding Officer, but I'll quickly talk about the two Catholic secondary schools in my constituency. Firstly, St Ambrose, which obviously folk will know was in the news a lot over the summer, and while the Deputy First Minister is here in the Chamber, I'll take again the opportunity to thank him for his intervention and bringing some clarity to an issue that's been of some concern to local people. But never at any point, Presiding Officer, was that to do with the pupils or teaching staff. Indeed, at St Ambrose, they achieve and attain very well in some very difficult circumstances. And Elaine Smith has already mentioned one such pupil. And just going through even my motions today, I was able to pick out two recent motions one for St Ambrose in mental health, which recognised pupils who were participating in Scottish Mental Health Arts Festival held in Lanarkshire, and more recently, 2019 Crown Office National Public Speaking Competition, where the two winners were from St Ambrose. And just this week in the local Advertiser, the St Ambrose pupils were critical in setting up a food pantry in nearby Blair Grove. So absolutely fantastic work in bringing in that inclusiveness and community spirit. And nearby St Andrews have also made the news recently for supporting the hospice and also supporting the Conforti Food Bank in Coatbridge, again in the same vein that I spoke about in St Ambrose. And 2019 was a very successful year for St Andrews as well, with many pupils winning bronze at the Duke of Edinburgh certificates. So overall, we can see that these schools are achieving. The second part of Elaine Smith's motion is about sectarianism. And again, I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment of the motion. In fact, I find it ludicrous that people could think that removing Catholic schools will help tackle sectarianism. Sectarianism predates Catholic schools. Anti-Catholicism is the problem. So how does removing the schools help with this? And while it may sound like a coherent argument in some circumstances, it's not backed up by evidence. And it's through the prism, I think anyway, of a West or at least Central Scotland psyche, and Elaine Smith made that point very well. Catholic schools are not the cause of sectarianism in Scotland. It's as simple as that, when we all must work together to stamp out all forms of hate. And I know that this Scottish Government is committed to doing that. Presiding Officer, because what annoys me most is that we're still having conversations like this, particularly in working-class, post-industrial areas. Coatbridge High and St Andrews, for example, both cover central Coatbridge, and they face the same primary issues: poverty. The division that we must address is wealth disparity and deprivation. That's the biggest issue facing our society and education system. Wealthier areas and those who can afford private education demonstrate better academic results and outcomes. That can't be right, and that's where the debate needs to be. Talking about whether we should have denominational schools or not is a smokescreen to this real debate. Presiding Officer, I'll conclude by again thanking Elaine Smith for not only bringing the debate today, but her dedication to this issue over the years. Thank you.
Thank you. I call John Mason, followed by Claire Adamson. Ms Adamson will be the last speaker in the open debate. Mr Mason.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thanks also to Elaine Smith for bringing forward this motion, which I fully support as well. Since the 1500s in Europe, we've had the major split between Protestant Catholic churches following the Reformation. And for most of that time, most people in Europe, including the UK and Scotland, have considered themselves to be Christian, even though sometimes their personal level of faith might have been fairly minimal. Quite frankly, both sides have behaved pretty shamefully at times. Both sides have discriminated against the other, and people were killed because they were on the wrong side. Scotland was no exception. Both sides behaved badly, to say the least, when they were in power. Schools were largely set up by the churches, and Scotland became one of the most literate countries in Europe. However, times moved on, and the state accepted a responsibility for schools. Discrimination against Catholics, and especially against Irish Catholics, was continuing, and understandably, Catholics wanted to keep their own schools when the state got more involved. We then move on to the present day, where Scotland is overwhelmingly secular, and those with a live personal faith are probably a relatively small minority in this country, although we still see cultural and traditional faith resurfacing at funerals, weddings, remembrance, and on the occasion of major tragedies. So at present, as I see it, we broadly have Catholic schools and we have secular schools, with some Catholic schools having a large proportion of non-Catholic pupils, perhaps because the families prefer a more openly Christian ethos and feel that there is a stronger values system in a Catholic school than in a secular one. The SNP policy has been that the state would fund particular schools if there was sufficient demand from parents. Potentially, this could mean a wide range of types of schools, including Steiner, Muslim, Jewish, or other Christian denominations, being state-funded. But so far, that has not really happened to any extent. I would certainly argue that such a range of schools does fit with our desire to treat all young people equally. Equality does not need to mean a uniform greyness, equality can be multicoloured and multifaceted. Freedom of religion or belief surely means equal treatment and respect, whether people have faith or not. Some would argue that faith must be both personal and private. I absolutely agree that it is personal, but it is not private. Just as our secular and humanist friends have every right to argue for their place in the public square and in education, so people who choose to follow a particular faith path have every right to be in the public square and in education. I think this does raise the question of the place of families and parents in education. Should the state, which in practice means the government or the council, have total control over schools and what young people learn? Or should parents and families have a degree of control too? Have we got the balance right between the state and the family at this time? This is particularly an issue with current subjects like same-sex relationships and transgender issues. Some parents and others feel that the state is too dominant in promoting what may be the majority view in Parliament, but which is not always accepted by the wider public. Can we allow room for diversity? I think it is perhaps unfortunate that we really only have two streams of schools within the state sector, and perhaps this has inevitably put focus on the Catholic sector, and Catholic schools, as many others have said this afternoon, are wrongly seen in some quarters as contributing towards sectarianism. But as Elaine Smith hinted at, when we put black and white young people in the same school, we do not solve racism. We still have it, unfortunately. So it is pretty obvious that the school is not the source of such deep-seated problems. So in conclusion, despite not being a Catholic, I welcome this motion and I welcome Catholic schools, and I do think we should be considering whether there is demand for other types of school as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Mason. I call Claire Adamson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and can I also thank Elaine Smith for bringing this motion to the Chamber this evening. I'm very proud to be allowed to speak in it, as I was to be invited to contribute to some of the videos around the celebration of 100 years of Catholic education just a short time ago. What hasn't been discussed today is what education means to the Catholic Church. And I think it was very interesting that a time for reflection from Skiaf today was delivered by a Jesuit brother, who of course are a teaching order. And as the niece of a Marist brother, you can understand that education and education as a way out of poverty and the way of emancipating people throughout the world, not just in Scotland, was so key to my understanding of the Catholic Church's relationship with education. And I think Elaine mentioned that the Catholic Church had funded for the schools to be built, but it's interesting that in a lot of cases they built the schools before they built the churches in their communities, because education was so key to their understanding and their relationship with their community and how they wanted their children to be raised and educated. I attended a Catholic school myself, St Aidan's Primary and Secondary in Wishaw, as did my son, which gives me the unique opportunity to welcome Archbishop Cushley tonight as a former chaplain of St Aidan's, and I know he has very fond memories, as do I, of my time at St Aidan's. And my son had a different experience from me. There weren't many people of other religions that I was aware of when I was at school, but there were many of his friends were Muslim friends that he met who attended St Aidan's. And also my son was able to take part in the Pope Benedict Caritas Awards, which was an award introduced, a medal given to those young people who demonstrate their faith by contributing through loving charitable service to their local community. And the Caritas Awards represents 400,000 hours of volunteering of young Catholics, and not just the Catholics from the school, the young people from the Catholic schools volunteering and supporting their local communities. I reflect also that in my son's time, the school, St Aidan's, was involved in the Mark Scott Leadership Awards. Mark Scott was a young man who was killed in a sectarian attack, and his family set up the Leadership Awards to bring groups of young people from different religious backgrounds and from different schools together, again in a project that would benefit the community. And I've seen many examples of Mark Scott Leadership Awards working with in housing associations, but working with older people, working in nurseries and working with younger children in the area to break down those barriers that unfortunately we hear still exist to this day. And also, just recently, when we were looking at the centenary of the First World War, St Aidan's, Coltness, Clyde Valley and Calderhead High Schools in my area came together to tell the story of Willie Angus, a VC recipient from the war, who had been a very talented football player. Indeed, he was signed for Celtic Football Club and showed great valour in the war. And the young people produced a film of this, and then to promote the film, they also produced a stage play with musical interludes. And they all got together to tell this story of compassion and about the futility of war and how it had affected the communities. And what it showed to me was an example of the Catholic school being part of the community and the riches and the diversity that makes us stronger as communities, because we have Catholic education alongside other education in our country. And I'm very proud to have supported the motion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call on John Swinney, close to the Government Cabinet Secretary, please.
President Officer, I'd like to begin my contribution by congratulating Elaine Smith for bringing forward this important debate this evening, and thank her for giving me and also members across the political spectrum an opportunity to express clearly and firmly our support for Catholic schools and Catholic education in Scotland. And I use the opportunity of my contribution to state that position clearly on behalf of the Scottish Government. This is a timely debate taking place during Catholic Education Week, a week in which we acknowledge the significant contribution to our education system that is made by the Catholic schools of Scotland. Elaine Smith began her contribution providing a necessary declaration of interest about her own associations with the Catholic education system. I feel obliged to do likewise. My youngest son, Matthew, is wonderfully educated at St Stephen's Roman Catholic Primary School in Blairgowrie, which is a shared campus referred to by Jackie Bailey, in which the identity and the values and the expressed faith of St Stephen's Primary School is in no way inhibited by the fact that it shares facilities with an outstanding school along the corridor, Newhill Primary School in Blairgowrie, demonstrating how we can modernise our education estate but maintain fundamentally the quality and the strength of our education system. I would like to join others in extending a warm welcome to representatives of some of our Roman Catholic schools from St Thomas of Aquins, St Augustine's and Holyrood High School here in the city of Edinburgh, to Barbara Cooper of the Scottish Catholic Education Service, who along with her colleagues makes an outstanding contribution to the formulation of education policy and direction in Scotland, and also to His Grace Archbishop Cushley, who makes a very welcome presence and contribution to our debate this evening. Last year marked, as members have said, the 100th anniversary of the 1918 Act and the integration of Catholic schools into the state education system. I was delighted to host a reception for pupils, for teachers, for the Papal Nuncio to Great Britain and for Scotland's bishops in the Great Hall at Edinburgh Castle to mark this occasion, and the First Minister had the privilege of delivering the Cardinal-winning lecture to mark this occasion as well. At those events and on many other occasions, the First Minister and I have been absolutely clear on the value that we place on Catholic education and the important role that Catholic schools have in building the society that we live in today in Scotland. The 1918 Education Act was important as it addressed a key inequality at that time. Between 1872 and 1918, the Roman Catholic community maintained its own schools at a time when parents were also, as ratepayers, contributing to the running of other schools. That meant almost inevitably that Roman Catholic schools, which educated 1/7 of Scotland's school children, were significantly under-resourced. That in turn meant that Catholic children were deprived of educational opportunities that other children could take for granted. That changed with the Education Act. The Government is committed to tackling today's inequalities, and Catholic schools play a key role in that too. Our Catholic schools contribute to all of Scotland's communities, Like non-denominational schools, they serve some of our most deprived communities and provide an important route out of poverty through the high-quality, values-based education that they provide. This government has made closing the attainment gap between children in affluent areas and children in poorer areas the defining aim of our government. We are doing that not simply because of the harm that inequality causes to individuals across the country, but also because inequality is bad for the country as a whole. All of us suffer when individuals, through no fault of their own, face barriers to fulfilling their potential. It means that they are less able to contribute their efforts, talents and ideas to wider society. Annabel Ewing made reference to the comments of Professor Sir Tom Devine, who talked about the effect of the 1918 Act in creating that growth in the large Catholic professional class, making a contribution to the mainstream of Scottish society. Members have talked in the course of the contributions today of the high quality of Catholic education, and one of the points that struck me when I was dealing with the St Ambrose High School issue in Mr McGregor's constituency during the summer, that one of the desperate aspirations of parents in that community was to make sure that their children were in no way deprived of the high-quality education that St Ambrose High School offered to their children. And I was very pleased that we were able to address those issues to enable the children to return to that high-quality education. But Catholic schools are also providing other opportunities for young people to thrive. And Claire Adamson made reference to the Caritas Awards, and I had the privilege to attend the Caritas Awards ceremony in Glasgow earlier this year. This event, involving over 3,000 pupils, showcased the charitable and community activities that hundreds of pupils attending Catholic schools take part in. The Caritas Award is an outstanding example of the service of young people in our country, and the award gives one example of the very broad range of awards that are now achieved by young people as part of their education system, but this one is uniquely provided for us by the Catholic education system. And I was delighted to see a number of representatives of the Catholic secondary school that serves my own constituency at St John's Academy in Perth receiving the Caritas Award, but then also seeing examples of how the young people live out the aspirations of the Caritas Awards through the recent work of St John's Academy in supporting an orphanage in Romania with the devoted service of many of the senior pupils of the school in the living out of the aspirations of the Caritas Awards. Elaine Smith's motion today refutes the concern that is sometimes raised that Catholic schools are in some way a source of sectarianism in our society. I agree entirely with Elaine Smith, as did the Independent Advisory Group on Tackling Sectarianism in Scotland, that there is absolutely no substance to the suggestion that denominational schools cause sectarianism. The Independent Advisory Group concluded, and I quote, that they do not believe that sectarianism stems from or is the responsibility of denominational schooling or specifically Catholic schools, nor that sectarianism would be eradicated by closing such institutions. And I think such powerful and informed contribution from the Independent Advisory Group should put to rest some of the rhetoric that we have heard, regrettably, on this particular subject. I would like to emphasise one of the key characteristics for me, which has been a contribution of the Catholic education system to Scottish education as a whole, and that is the importance of the values-based education which lies at the heart of Catholic schools and which represents the vital contribution it makes to building a diverse, tolerant and loving society. Elaine Smith quoted Archbishop Tartaglia in his explanation of the values that are promoted in Catholic education through the promotion of gospel values of truth, love, justice and freedom. If there were ever four values that are the antithesis of sectarianism, I would advance that truth, love, justice and freedom are those values. And what is fascinating to observe is that as these values have underpinned Catholic education in Scotland for so many years, when the national debate took place on the formulation of curriculum for excellence, one of the conclusions of that process was the importance of anchoring values at the heart of our curriculum. So curriculum for excellence was developed with the reliance on Clear and strong values of wisdom, justice, compassion and integrity, which members of Parliament will be familiar, are the values that are engraved on the mace that sits in front of the presiding officer this evening. So the Catholic education system and its embracing of firm gospel values, I believe, has served the Scottish education system as a whole well by anchoring the importance of values in our education system as lived out by the inclusion of values at the heart of Curriculum for Excellence. The Catholic Education Services website gives us a very strong insight into the description of the aims and the approaches taken forward in the Catholic education within Scotland, demonstrating the importance that is attached within our Catholic schools on the reliance upon religious learning that helps young people to nurture respect for other Christian traditions and world faiths, that provides opportunities for spiritual growth, and provides our children with the skills of reflection, discernment and moral decision-making that they need. And in the complex world of the 21st century, the reliance upon these essential characteristics of religious learning serve our young people well in our Catholic schools. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity I have had this evening to make clear the Scottish Government's support for Catholic schools and our commitment also to tackling sectarianism. Joan McAlpine mentioned the comments of Mark Miller about private conversations amongst politicians questioning the future of Roman Catholic schools. I can say openly on the record I have never heard such a conversation taking place. And I think the demonstration of cross-party support for Catholic education that we have heard tonight perhaps puts to rest comments of that nature. It is vital that our support for Catholic education is expressed without equivocation, and I do so positively and enthusiastically in Parliament this evening. The Scottish Government remains an unequivocal supporter of Catholic education. We value the contribution Catholic schools and faith schools make, and we are absolutely determined to ensure that this tradition is maintained in Scotland as a vital element of the Scottish education system.
Thank you. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting of Parliament. And now that I've closed the meeting, you can clap if you like.